Hello, hello. Welcome to another installment of Cage's Comments. I am Alex Cage, and today I wanted to comment on a little further. I touched on it at the end of my last video uh, on the Jalen Duren Pistons, and then also just kind of the second apron and how fascinated I am by whether or not players get these max contract extensions as we're in this will be the fourth season under the new CBA, and we're seeing the Walker Kessler situation and Jalen Duren both hit restricted free agency, and I'm really fascinated to see how this plays out over the course of this CBA with team building, and then of course very curious how it ends up playing out with the Spurs. That being said, so that's what we're going to talk about today. It is the 20th of July, and as of last checking, Jalen Duren has still not signed or been signed and traded. Last reports that I've read, the Pistons are not interested in signing trades. Jalen Duren wants $40 million plus, close to, if not the maximum amount of money. And the Pistons, they watched the postseason and they were like, hey, dude, you got outplayed by Paul Reed. Short and sweet of that situation. Maybe let's pump the brakes on making you a max player. So, as I mentioned, right, the thing that fascinates me about this is Jalen Duren, just to recap this year, right, third team All NBA, All Star for the first time, was a 10 and 11 guy in the three previous seasons, and this year jumped his average to almost 20 and 10. He was 19 and 12, I think. Let me pull that up real quick. Just double check myself, make sure I'm not out here lying my ass off to you guys. Yeah, 19 and a half points, 19 and a half, 10 and a half boards on 65% from the field. PER was 26, which is really, really good. So he was basically turned himself into 20 and 10 this season, and then the postseason happened, and he went right back to being a 10 and 8, 10 and 9 guy, averaged 10.2, 8.5 boards, shot 51% from the field, down from 65 in the regular season. So just not anywhere near as effective. And the Pistons, if you watched the Magic, if you watched the Cavs series multiple times throughout that series, one of the reasons Isaiah Stewart's not on this team, right, is that they looked better with Paul Reed oftentimes at center than they did either of the two guys who are higher paid and ahead of him on the depth chart, which is why Isaiah Stewart's not there and Paul Reed's going to get, a bigger role this coming season. But on Duren and the extensions specifically. So I was really curious how many players kind of, that were drafted during that last CBA that made either All-Star or All-NBA teams on their rookie contracts. So there were 20 guys who made All-Stars. There were 9 guys who made All-NBAs. Their first, 4 years in the league that happened during the old CBA. Of those 20 guys, one of them, if my scrolling through Spotrac is correct, one of them, Domantas Sabonis with Indiana, didn't get the max. Everybody else that made an All-Star or made an All-NBA team got the max. And if you made an All-NBA team, with the exception of, I think, one guy, there were 9 guys, almost all of them got the max, either with escalators to get them, right, if they did the All-NBA thing again, or if they made a higher team or something like that, or they just straight up got the Supermax, right? So guys in Jalen Duren's position under the last CBA. I said at the end of the last video, I felt like they got paid automatically, and we just didn't, again, even with the postseason, we just didn't do it. We just didn't worry about it. Because even if the contract ended up not being great, a la Ben Simmons, right? There was always going to be a team that would take the money, that would take the contract, and eat the money for you for a first round pick or something. And it wasn't, and because it didn't prohibit you from aggregating players in a trade, right? From It didn't freeze future picks by potentially being over these aprons. It didn't come with all of the team building restrictions that having a contract that is, essentially underwater, the way some of those could end up being if you ended up being wrong on your young player. It you took the asset, you took the contract, you signed the guy, and you just said, we'll deal with it later. If it ends up being bad, we'll figure that out later, but there will be an off ramp, excuse me, for us if that's the case. But now, with all of the restrictions that can come into play, not being able to take more money back in a trade, not being able to aggregate players in a trade, having your future picks frozen, all of those things that can happen as you go over these aprons. And if you stay in these aprons, teams are way less willing to just take on bad money. And so I think we're going to see a real shift, and are seeing a real shift in these front offices' minds and plans about who can we pay. And maybe, yes, we'll put more onus on the Brunsons, the Wimbys, the best players to take less. But if those guys, as I said last time, if those guys don't want to take less, those guys are not going to have to take less. They will not have the, they will still have the leverage, because you don't let Wimby potentially walk out the door, right? You just don't let that happen. But Jalen Duren is not Cade Cunningham, right? And he had a really good year. He was third team All NBA, like I said, basically 20 and 11. He was excellent. But it was the first year that he had played at that level. And even though he is young, you're not gonna, if you give him this contract, you are essentially locking yourself into Cade and Duren. And with the way they struggled to have anybody else give them anything throughout the postseason, I understand the Pistons' hesitation, and I think that Duren, and maybe also uh, exacerbated. I butchered that. There's no way that sounded correct. But made worse by the fact that cap space, because of another change to the CBA where guys can sign, veterans can sign these extensions 2 years early as opposed to just a year early. Cap space is hard to find, right? The Lakers had a bunch this year. They had to basically get an entire new team, though, to have that cap space available. There's very few instances anymore where it's like, okay, one or two big contracts off the books, and now we keep basically the same crew, but we're going to add one or two big pieces in free agency, right? Paul George is probably the last max player in free agency that we'll see for some time, right? Giannis didn't hit none of these guys. Donovan Mitchell just again upped it again. We're probably not really going to see any of these guys unless it's a LeBron situation where it's like they are on their last stops. So exactly. So I'm a little off topic now but Duren is going to have a much harder time just hitting true free agency and being able to go wherever he wants, because teams are not going to have that available, because essentially you basically got to plan like 2 years in advance and hold your water for 2 years to have that cap space available. And then you're just hoping that a star player would be fed up with his team for 2 seasons and not take the money or get traded, right? It gives teams such a longer runway in that instance. So I am, again, we'll see where this ends up playing out, but I mean, Amin Thompson, Osir Thompson with Detroit as well. Those guys are up for extensions. Brandon Miller is up for an extension in Charlotte. None of those guys have, and I really like Amin in Houston, right? But those guys, they haven't been all stars. They haven't been all NBA players. Both of them have been first team all defense. Brandon Miller hasn't made an all star, hasn't made an all NBA team. But given kind of, those are all top 5 picks, all same draft, right? Those guys are all up this year. Those guys in this situation would probably, under the last CBA, have some real leverage to go out and get, if not the max, very, very close to it. But Houston's already done 2 first-round pick contracts with Şengün and Jalen Green. Neither one of them got the max, again, under this CBA. The Spurs are going to be facing this next summer with Castle. And he might be the only one from that draft class, on another side note here, uh, that is even up for that kind of money at all, because that has been a rough draft class. So regardless, I've really taken myself, I think, off topic here. But my point is, what Jalen Duren had done under the last CBA would have basically automatically gotten him paid, and it is not. And the after effects of that, I think, are going to be really interesting to watch going forward, because the real question is, like, how much of your cap can you spend on your star players? So on that note, I think I have some other interesting or noteworthy numbers. So stars is a bit of a, soft term, right? Jamal Murray's a star. This was his first year ever making an all-star team, all ever, all NBA or anything like that, right? But if you look at, so I kind of just went through the last CBA, which was from the 2016 to 2017 season, right? The first KD Warriors season through the Nuggets, right? So this CBA didn't start until the 2024 season. It went into effect the summer after the Nuggets won. And so, previous CBA, the Warriors, with 4 guys, granted, their first year had 75% of the cap allocated to those 4 guys: Steph, Clay, Draymond, and KD, obviously. And remember, as I'm saying these numbers, right? NBA, you can go over the cap. So even though you have 75% of it, or as I'm about to say the next year, 95% of it, allocating those guys to keep your players, you can go over, which is how these teams work. They didn't actually fit literally, the other 11 guys on the team into 5% of the cap. So Warriors, those 4 guys, 75. And obviously this matters because it's 4 guys as opposed to 2 or 3. So having a greater percentage makes more sense there. But those guys, 75%. The next year, 95. Just real quick, this one is full of side tangents here. I think the owners really overreacted when they made all these aprons and rules and wanted to implement this, or maybe they just wanted an excuse to be cheap. But the KD Warriors was actually one of the teams that they were like, "This is why you can't just have the richest owner just pay a bunch of money." People forget all of the confluence of events that were required for Kevin Durant to join the Warriors. The cap spiked way more than they thought it would. they fixed that immediately by limiting how much the cap could spike, only 10%, right? But it went way up because they got a lot more money from a new media deal, a lot more revenue, and they voted to take all of it basically in 1 year instead of kind of smoothing it over. So that had to happen. Then you had to have both the OKC Thunder with Kevin Durant and then the Warriors blow a 3-1 lead. Both of those had to happen. You have that back-to-back 3-1 leads blown, and one of them would have been the first time it was ever in the finals. You also had, and this is probably the most critical spot, Steph Curry was making 12% of the cap that year. He was making no money because he had right, some ankle injuries early in his career, and he did not turn into this All NBA MVP guy until after he signed this extension, which is how he was making almost no money that season, so they could still have the cap space despite having, their big three already. All of those things had to happen for the Warriors. So I do think, again, all the aprons and all of the hand wringing over just paying for titles was an overreaction. But I digress. Nonetheless, the Warriors, those 2 years, 75 and then 95% of the cap. The Raptors with Lowry and Kawhi, 55% of the cap. The Lakers the next year with LeBron and AD, 60%, 59. The Bucks with Middleton, Giannis, and Holiday, 80%. The Warriors again in 22, but this time just with those three, Curry, Clay, and Green, 95% at that point because Curry's on his supermax. And then you had the Nuggets with Jokic, Murray, and I am calling MPJ. He was top lottery pick for him. They signed him to a big deal in the big rookie extension. Those guys were 77%. Every single one of those teams, with the exception of the Raptors, would have been the most expensive in terms of stars, percentage of the cap stars, than the current collective bargaining agreement. So that's the Celtics, the Thunder, and the Knicks. So the Celtics with Tatum and Brown, those guys were only 47% because they were on their rookie extensions, not these massive supermax deals yet that year. OKC had two players with SGA, Holmgren, and Williams. Or excuse me, SGA wasn't on the rookie deal, but Holmgren and Williams, but both still on their rookie contracts. So they were only 36% of the cap. And then Brunson and Towns were 56, and obviously that's with Brunson having taken the pay cut. So that could have been higher, right? So 47, 36, and 56. And if rounding, you could basically say 47, 37, and 57 versus basically a bare minimum of 60% of the cap. I think what that means going forward is in most instances you're going to see like Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns flipped, where it's Brunson who makes 34 but Cat makes the 22 because Cat was a guy who got extended and got his supermax from Minnesota, right? And then they decided they didn't want to pay that as these aprons were coming. But in most instances, your best player is probably going to be a little bit higher, right, than the next guy down. So I think the 3 stars, and this is where Spurs fans is probably important for us. The idea that you're going to have 3, quote unquote, star players on the roster, and that they're going to, this might only happen when those guys are on rookie deals. We will see with OKC having Jalen Williams and Holmgren, and now obviously SGA all on big deals and extensions. We'll see what they ultimately do and how that looks. But I really do wonder if that's actually the only way that kind of model is going to work, or if in a year or 2 years, particularly if OKC doesn't win the title, that we're going to see them have to move Williams or Holmgren, and which one of those, that decision has to be made. And for the Spurs, obviously, we know Fox is, the time is a ticking there. But with Castle and Harper, I am going to be very curious in next year, next summer with Castle, what those extension talks look like and where that number ends up landing. And then with Harper the year after, and do the Spurs maybe even decide to get further ahead of that, and it actually comes to the point where they're like, we actually can't keep all three, right? Like it's not a tenable situation, and the flexibility with the cap in accordance with the assets that you would get from trading one of those guys, is actually, if is there going to be a front office that will look at that, do that math, and say, actually, that's way more worth it if we do end up with three quote unquote stars or three core pieces moving forward. So I'm fascinated by that. There's some numbers for that, but um, that I think will be one of the most interesting parts of this CBA moving forward, is what do the second tier, the second and third best players on a team end up looking like. Because, and I was acting like I was ending this, and then I remembered something else. To steal a take from a guy I like a decent amount here, in Nick Wright, he made the point before that, right? Being Jamal Murray, being Klay Thompson is like the best spot to be in the NBA, because you get all of the money that the top guys get, that Steph Curry gets, that Jokic, right? Like you can make that amount of money, but you don't deal with nearly half the criticism that those guys get. And when you play awesome, you get all of the praise, right? Like you're like, wow, Jamal Murray's awesome. Clay's awesome. When Game 6 Clay is awesome. When it's with Jamal Murray not against the Timberwolves in the postseason, it's awesome, right? Jamal Murray against the Lakers, it's awesome. And then when you flop or whatever, like we're not talking about you. We're talking about this is a black mark on Jokic's career, as opposed to like really drilling in. So I don't think that's going to continue. I think we're going to see more battles like this between Duren and teams of, again, guys that you want to keep, guys that you want to have around, but you you know unless you've already won a championship with them, the idea of going into the second apron, or not, kind of losing that flexibility, is not tenable for most of these front offices. They are treating that second apron like a hard cap. So I'm fascinated to see how that happens going forward. You guys, let me know in the comments. Appreciate you listening. Like, rate, subscribe, all that good jazz. Talk to you guys later. Bye.